You know, sometimes you just wake up on a random day and you're gonna be like, today's really a good day, right? Sun's shining, finally, it's not raining every day, and yet another good day for another review. So today we will be talking about this particular thing right here, which is the Hidizs MK12 Turris. Now the MK12s are retailing for $199 but currently right now on Hidizs y'all can get it for only $179, and if y'all want the duck bloat version it goes for $239. But remember to act quick because that one is just gonna be for a limited run. So anyways, going back to this, now the name of the Turris is derived from this thing right here, the immortal jellyfish, which I will never try to pronounce it because I'll probably butcher it. But the first time when I see this, me with my friend, this thing kind of comes to mind. Like, I shit you not. We both are like, is this kind of inspired by Hollow Knight? Now, Hollow Knight references aside, with how 2025 has been, there's releases every week. The fact that this thing is still a hot topic and a lot of people are still loving this pair is mainly because of its config. Even though it is a single DD, but with the fact that this thing has a diaphragm that's made of 91% pure magnesium, that spec sheet alone really gives a lot of attention to this particular set. Mainly because when you talk about magnesium, it usually refers to things like, speakers from Focal, or maybe in terms of like IEM worlds. I have two particular IEMs that I previously reviewed that are made with magnesium related diaphragms, which is the Z1R as well as the Elysian Pilgrims. Now those two are stating that those use magnesium aluminum, if I'm not mistaken. This one is just saying it's 91% pure magnesium. Regardless, kind of like the same properties that you'll expect. And in terms of how these sound, let's get to it in a minute. Now for the unboxing experiences of this is very simple, very straightforward. I still want to say, just looking at this really reminds me a lot of Hollow Knight for some reason. I really want to say this because of its, kind of like a buggy texture, if it makes any sense. Opening this up, you will be seeing the head shells right there. Pulling it out, you will see it is also being presented in a default rose gold nozzle, which I personally feel like it's quite a nice touch. Other than that, you also get 3 sets of tips, which has vocal, balance, and bassy tips. And personally, after testing all the 3, I do find there to be some significant differences, and I could say that the sensitivity of the Hidizs MK12 to be able to be tip rolled is quite high. Now speaking of tips, Hidizs has also sent this my way, which is the Sea Anemone ear tips, which I personally like the most, even more than the balanced ear tips, mainly because they do feel softer than the default tips. And personally, I feel like this one gives more of an edge, so that for this pair, which is a balanced set, sounds a little bit more V-shaped. Bass could go deeper, even though there is a sub-bass roll-off, which we'll get into. And the next thing is also the highs are a little bit more intimate. But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Removing the foam cutouts from the box, you will be seeing a last compartment which houses the Hidizs pouch. Which, honestly, I just want to say it's a little bit of a bummer because you're spending close to 200 MSRP for this, yet you still get a similar pouch. But that's just me kind of nitpicking at this point. And inside it, you will be getting its interchangeable nozzles as well. Now this one is going to be similar as to the MK10s, which if you guys haven't seen the review yet, links up here or down below. Tuning nozzles are also of the same degree, where I personally feel like it can also have a significant change, but not extremely radical. The treble one, I don't know why, but I personally feel like it's a little bit unnatural for me. Bass is fine. Treble is not for me, I'll say it that much. But with all that being said, the last thing I just want to show you guys is also a color matching 2-core SBC, which as you can see right here. Quite a nice cable, even though it is of a smaller gauge. I personally don't mind because this thing really feels quite nice. And speaking of cables, Hidizs has also, again, really seriously, thank you Jessie from Hidizs for actually, taking care of me. They also sent us this, which is the BL1 Pro cable, as you can see right here. It is an 8-core 6N copper cable, which personally I feel like it's quite good. So for people who are saying that this thing is a little bit too intimate, use something along the lines of this and you guys can feel like it's a little bit more further back. You'll feel like the soundstage will get a little bit further away, so it will have a more laid back presentation. Now with all that aside, just one thing I want to mention before going into the sound, which is fit. Now This is honestly not really that big of a deal, but not sometimes, but initially during the first time when I tried to, put this into position to my ear, this bottom part, honestly, is extremely pointy. It could literally just stab you with this. But nevertheless, I feel like it's still quite a well-built IEM, even though it has this weight to it. I feel like ergonomically it fits quite well into my ear, so I don't really have any issue with it. So with all the ramblings aside, how does this pair actually sound with its so-called claimed 91% magnesium diaphragm? Spoiler alert, it sounds extremely good, to the point where for some reason midway through me testing this, I kind of had this very weird thing where I just thought to myself like, wait, doesn't this sound like my home theater system? But we'll get into that pretty soon. But generally, this thing has a balanced tuning, and overall it has a neutral, warm-ish tonality, and overall it has quite a smooth texture throughout. Two more things that are quite obvious. The vocals are extremely forward in terms of positioning, which I extremely like. This thing has quite a nice wide soundstage despite it only being $199 US. Like, if you blind test me right now, I will say that for this price I'll probably list it for around, I would say, 300 plus to 400 plus US dollars. Like, the staging really gives me that level of wideness. But the more important thing is also because of the bass. Now, the magnesium diaphragm claims that this thing could do a lower rumble bass. This also applies only when you tip roll it correctly, because on the balanced ear tips, I personally feel like the roll off is quite significant, where sub bass is there, but the rumble is just there. It's minimal, it kind of rumbles, but if let's say lower bass kicks in, it will definitely kind of overshadow it a little bit. Using the C anemone though, this thing kind of bumps up the sub bass a little bit so that you will feel more presence on that area. But in general, the bass overall is quite quick and responsive, and in comparison to something along the lines of, I would say, beryllium plated diaphragms, this one has the same level of tactility, but it has a softer decay to it. And when it diffuses, it gives you that very deep, airy extension that you typically find on metal dome speakers. Now, given the fact that this thing is a balance set, expect this thing to have good amounts of bass, but not extreme amounts, kind of like Fat Freak. So, with that being said though, the mid bass in my opinion is quite interesting. It overall gives you a quite hard, a quite assertive feeling, where overall it also accompanies well with overtones on the low end, as well as reaching up top and extending to the mids. So, dynamics on this is honestly quite good. And with the fact that this thing has a magnesium diaphragm, although not to the point where it could rival the C1R, let's be honest, I would say this thing honestly is a tad bit more interesting than using the Elysian Pilgrims. Mainly because this thing gives you more, I would say, bounce and more dynamics to the bass. So bass licks overall on this will sound more assertive, it will sound more energetic, and it will sound more livelier. The Elysian Pilgrims will, sound good, but not extremely interesting. Okay, moving on to vocals, which is my favorite part. This thing really shines a lot in terms of vocals. So the positioning is honestly quite forward, so that everything is in the same plane as every single instrument. Vocal timbre, I would say, is quite natural, but overall has quite a smoothened out tinge to it. And the MK12, in my opinion, really translates everything well, where it provides note weight to vocalists, but not extremely much to the point where it feels a little bit too thick, a little bit too in your face. But it is still, I would say, a more intimate pair. But the good thing about this is that just out of the box, unlike the MK10, this thing does not have any hints of sibilance. It feels bright in the S's, but not sibilant, not sharp at all. So, that's a plus. And in my opinion, I feel like throughout the spectrum, the warm tinge is probably the most prevalent among the mids. But again, it might be misunderstood as being, since it's feeling quite smooth, it's quite laid back, we might misunderstood it as warm. So you get what I mean. And this again is the part where when I'm listening to old songs, something along the lines of Maria Takeuchi, something along the lines of Kei Marimura, for some reason it really just reminds me a lot of my monitor audio speakers. Like, they have the same level of instrument texture, not only in the bass region, but mainly in all the instruments that I listen to. There's just that very weird, bright twang that you get when you listen to metal dome speakers, and this thing kind of emulates that as well. So to put this in the simplest way, This thing basically is a speaker sounding IEM, a metal dome speaker sounding IEM. And among everything, I would say macro details in the mids are also quite good. Extremely good, I would say yes, but not to the point where it starts to get technical, because this pair, it's more musical than analytical. Macros definitely are quite fun to listen to, but they don't really harbor anything for me to say things in more specificity. But going on to the upper mids and treble is something where I really want to elaborate, because mainly the first notice when I listen to this a few songs in is that micro details all really just pops out and lives in a separate layer so that people can have a very nice experience of things throughout here and there. Now percussions are also quite transparent to the mix, so it can get rough when it needs to, it can get kind of spicy when it needs to, but it does not translate to the point where it gets overly fatiguing, overly splashy, heaty. Overall, it still has quite a laid back, smooth and out feeling. Not too much, just a little bit enough to make you not reach the point of fatigueness. Throughout this whole spectrum, I will feel like the energy is still very well maintained so that it keeps you on your toes, but not too much where it starts to feel a little bit too much. So quite well balanced in terms of its dynamics. Hi-hat specifically also has that very nice airy decay, which I really enjoy. Now, of every single micro details that I've listened to, the best ones that are being produced are those related to bells or chimes. All of those tings, all those, you get what I mean, just sounds extremely dreamy, extremely ethereal. It's just amazing. And in terms of the technical highlights, I think I probably rambled a lot at this point talking about how good the dynamics is, and it definitely is. Everything is being controlled extremely well, so nothing feels recessed. Everything has its own fair share to be shown in the spotlight. But definitely, for some people that are listening to this, they might feel like it's a little bit too much. It might be a little bit too, I would say, overly busy. But personally, as a guy who likes balanced and neutral tuning, this one is quite good. It's still not too much for me. Going on to staging, very good staging. I would say again, it's at least, in my opinion, close to double the price in comparison to everything else on the market. Now that I think about it, I think this kinda sounds a little bit more wider than the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims definitely have more reach, but this thing overall sounds more wider. And imaging and separation is also done quite well, but not extremely well. Mainly because this thing is, again, a more musical IEM rather than a technical one. So for people who really want more detail, this one is not up to those levels of standards, because if you want that level of standard, definitely you will sacrifice musicality and enjoyment, which comes down to the last part, detail retrieval. This thing is definitely a more musical set, so you don't want to expect too much technical prowess from it from the analytical side, but nevertheless it handles micro details extremely well, specifically in regions of the upper mids, give or take, around that region, and every single thing in that area really just shines, really just pops out. It's basically just giving you more flair overall here and there so that you feel like you're getting extremely engaged. Okay, we've talked about everything. What are my final thoughts on this particular set? So again, single DD, a magnesium driver, and personally I feel like this thing really takes the cake for what it's trying to claim to do, because the type of bass that you are getting from this set is really something else, and I feel like that's probably the most important highlight that I want to give to this set, because definitely balance, it is quite good in terms of the vocals, it's quite good in terms of the highs, but the type of texture that you get on the low end is really not that easy to come across unless you're finding things that are at least twice or multiple times the price of the set. Again, like the Z1R, like the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims, I would say, is probably closer to what you're getting in this. And again, you might also find some level of resemblance between this and the IER Z1R as well. So with all that being said, quite a good set. I would totally recommend it for people who want something for an upgrade, but they do not want something that is more technical. They just want something that is musical, that can be listened to without any form of fatigue. I guess I'm just gonna wrap this up. Thank you for watching this video. For anybody who is interested, again, it is currently still on sale on Hidizs.net. Links down there. And if y'all want to get it with something along the lines of, the AP80 Pro Max, there's also some bundle deals that y'all can look down on Indiegogo. I'll link it down below as well. Thank you, Hidizs, once again for sending these my way. Thank you, Jessie. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.